Hello, welcome to this very brief video on how to approach the unseen poem. The first thing that you're trying to do is to figure out what the question is asking of you. This instance says, on aging, how does the poet present the speaker's attitudes to growing old? Now the exam board appear to be much more concerned with meaning rather than method, technique for this question. That's not to say that you avoid method or technique, but the first thing that you've got to do is to pin down what the attitude towards growing old is. And as in previous videos, and for the approach to the anthology poems, I would advise trying to create a thesis, a beef, where you've got three different things that the poet is trying to say through their speaker. Let's read the poem on aging. When you see me sitting quietly like a sack left on the shelf, don't think I need your chattering. I'm listening to myself. Hold! Stop! Don't pity me. Hold! Stop your sympathy. Understanding if you got it, otherwise I'll do without it. When my bones are stiff and aching, and my feet won't climb the stair, I will only ask one favour. Don't bring me no rocking chair. When you see me walking, stumbling, don't study and get it wrong. 'Cause tired don't mean lazy, and every goodbye ain't gone. I'm the same person I was back then. A little less hair, a little less chin, a lot less lungs and much less wind. But ain't I lucky I can still breathe in? And there we have it. So, the first thing you're trying to do is to say what, as I said before, the attitudes towards growing old are. And I think there are a couple of different things that you can say. The first one that we could write here, it's quite hard to see, but is that of annoyance. And I should say the reason it's hard to see is because I'm using a green pen. A simple but straightforward thing to do is to take a different coloured pen in on the day of the exam so you can actually see what your main points are. So the first thing I'd say is that of annoyance towards the way that particularly younger people appear to view the elderly. So if I want to develop this, I might add something like this. Annoyance at the stereotypes about the old and the elderly. The second thing I might want to identify as a problem, and an attitude, would be that of acceptance. The speaker in this particular poem appears to accept that they're growing old, and they don't necessarily want sympathy. So an acceptance as to that aging is a part of life, but a reminder, really, a forceful reminder that no sympathy is required. And perhaps the third thing I might say about the poem is that the speaker still views themselves as the same person. And why wouldn't you be the same person just because you are 64 rather than 16 doesn't necessarily mean that you're hugely different. Certainly not in terms of the way that you think about the world. Now, having said that, these are the three main things of the poem, perhaps, or you've identified three things that you think are the speaker's attitudes towards growing old. It becomes an exercise then in proving those attitudes. So as I look through the poem again, I want to find examples of annoyance at stereotypes about the elderly. So the evidence of annoyance is fairly straightforward. I can go to this constant use of exclamation, because what we have here is exclamation and imperative. An imperative verb is an instructive verb, and there's a very strong sense here that the speaker of the poem appears to be saying, back off, hold, stop, don't pity me. There's no ambiguity in this. It's don't feel sorry for me. With regards to the stereotypes, I need to sort of demonstrate something of those stereotypes. And there are numerous stereotypes. When my bones are stiff and aching is an example. But perhaps the most appropriate example of the stereotype is the most extreme one. And it's that of the rocking chair or the stumbling old woman. This gives you an opportunity to actually discuss the stereotype of the rocking chair. Where has this come from? Why does it exist? I said the stereotype of an old woman because the rocking chair appears to be a strangely female object rather than a male one. For some reason that I don't necessarily know. There aren't numerous images of older gentlemen sat in rocking chairs. This is evidently something to do with gender roles of the past, and this is a discussion that I want to have in the poem. The second point I would seek to then prove is that of acceptance, but how no sympathy is required. Now I could reinforce acceptance through the use of these exclamations and the assertive, instructive tone that we've got throughout the poem, but I think there are other examples of it, such as in this section here, "'Cause tired don't mean lazy, and every goodbye ain't gone." There's a sort of recognition here that being an older person might make you more tired, and she accepts that that's actually the case. There's an implied acceptance there. It's further reinforced by "I'm the same person I was back then," and you can see here now that the points are beginning to merge. She's the same person, she accepts that she's the same person, and there's no sympathy necessarily required. There's an acknowledgement that things have changed, a little less hair, a little less chin. But the final line of the poem is the one that we are asked to think about last, hence why it's the final line of the poem. But that's the thing we're supposed to take away. "Ain't I lucky I can still breathe in?" Same person, she feels fortunate. So the attitudes towards growing old are annoyance, acceptance, but I think a sense of fortune at the end. Now, I have implicitly, throughout this brief discussion, spoken of method. I've made reference to the frequent exclamations, I've made reference to the imperative, I've made reference to the use of stereotype. I'm sure that if I were writing about it, I would probably want to acknowledge the sort of colloquialisms in the poem itself, the sort of inarticulate / incorrect use of language, the fact that it's non-standard English. "'Cause tired don't mean lazy." Standard English would suggest that should be "because tired doesn't mean lazy." And the point here is, well, why is that being done? I think it's to show that this is a normal person, that life and ageing is standard, it's typical, it applies to us all. This isn't necessarily an event that happens only to the wealthy and to the fated, those who are beloved. I've also implicitly discussed method when I'm talking about the last line of the text. So the fact that I haven't mentioned that there's only one stanza, the fact that I haven't mentioned that there is a sort of irregular rhyme scheme, well, that doesn't really matter, because the job of your writing with an unseen poem is to focus on the things that you think and to demonstrate that with proof that's in the poem. And if you do that and you focus primarily on meaning, then you're likely to do well. That's because it's question 27.2, which is more focused and more interested on method. So prioritise the meaning, say what you think, and then you should be fine. The structure of your writing: you start with an introduction which outlines annoyance, acceptance, the same person. You start with the beef, and then you should have something like 3 subsequent paragraphs that demonstrate and prove exactly why you are right. That's it. Best of luck.